The courtroom was suffocatingly silent when she finally raised her head. For a long moment, no one moved. Not the judge, not the lawyers, not the rows of observers packed tightly behind the wooden rail. Even the guards seemed frozen, as if any sound might fracture the fragile order holding the room together. At the center of it all sat Song Yiren, once an actress whose face had filled billboards and screens across the country. Now, a condemned woman awaiting the final accounting of her life. Her skin looked almost translucent under the harsh courtroom lights. The brightness exposed every hollow beneath her eyes, every tremor in her hands. This was not the face of defiance people had expected. It was the face of someone already stripped of illusions. The death sentence lay heavy in the air, unspoken yet absolute. It had been delivered. It could not be undone. For weeks, the public had assumed the ending would be simple. Song Yiren would bow her head. She would accept the verdict. She would disappear quietly into the machinery of justice, remembered only as a disgraced accomplice in the death of a beloved star. Silence, after all, was what the system demanded. Silence was what it always received. But something changed the moment she lifted her gaze. Her eyes moved slowly across the room, over the polished desks, over the men in dark suits who refused to meet her stare, over the press benches where reporters waited, pens poised, hungry for a final quote that would confirm the narrative they had already written. She inhaled, unsteadily. When she spoke, her voice was thin, but it did not waver. What followed would not be remembered as a plea for mercy. It would be remembered as an accusation. The words that left her mouth did not describe a single crime, nor a single victim. They traced the outline of something far larger, a structure built quietly, deliberately, behind closed doors and locked contracts. An empire sustained not by talent or merit, but by fear, obedience, and the careful disposal of those who refused to comply. To understand why her testimony would ignite a national reckoning, one must look backward, long before the courtroom, long before the blood and the trial. Back to a time when Song Yiren was known for something else entirely. Back when her name was synonymous with youth, promise, and innocence. Back when she stood beside Menglong beneath stage lights, smiling for cameras that never captured what waited beyond the frame. They were celebrated as symbols of a new generation, rising stars, untouched, unbroken. Yet even then, the system was already closing in. It had rules. It always did. Rules that were never written down, but always enforced. Rules that rewarded obedience and punished hesitation. Rules that demanded silence as the price of survival. What happened to Menglong was not an accident. It was not the result of a single violent moment. It was the inevitable outcome of resistance inside a machine that could not tolerate refusal. Song Yiren would come to understand this too late. By the time she realized what had been set in motion, her role had already been assigned. Now, with nothing left to protect, she faced the room and chose to speak. She had nothing left to lose, and that made her the most dangerous person in the room. Before the courtroom, before the verdict, before a single accusation was spoken aloud, Song Yiren existed inside a different narrative, one carefully constructed for public consumption. She was introduced to audiences as effortless, bright, approachable, the kind of actress whose presence felt reassuring rather than intimidating. Critics praised her natural expressions. Brands sought her image. Casting directors described her as dependable, uncontroversial, safe. Menglong occupied a similar space, though his ascent was steeper. He had emerged as a rare phenomenon, a young performer whose popularity crossed demographics and borders. He did not project arrogance or rebellion. Instead, he radiated restraint. Interviews portrayed him as humble, almost withdrawn. A man grateful for success but visibly uncomfortable with the machinery surrounding it. Together, Song and Yu became a familiar pairing. On screen, on stage, on red carpets where their names were announced in the same breath. Fans read meaning into every shared glance. Entertainment media speculated about romance, framing them as the embodiment of a clean, aspirational future for the industry. Executives encouraged the image. It sold well. Innocence always did. What the cameras never captured was how quickly that innocence became a liability. The entertainment system that elevated them was not interested in purity. It was interested in control. Contracts were signed early, long before either truly understood their implications. Clauses written in precise legal language granted sweeping authority over schedules, appearances, and private conduct. At first, the demands seemed ordinary: late rehearsals, mandatory dinners, networking events framed as opportunities rather than obligations. Song Yiren believed this was the cost of professionalism. She had been taught to endure discomfort quietly, to smile through exhaustion, to trust those who claimed to know how the industry worked. When she was summoned to her company headquarters late one evening, she assumed it was a discussion about upcoming projects. The office was nearly empty when she arrived. Lights dimmed, staff gone. Only one door illuminated at the end of the corridor. Inside, the conversation was brief. A contract placed on the desk. A warning delivered with practiced calm. Play by the rules, or disappear. The words were not shouted. They did not need to be. Their meaning was unmistakable. At that moment, the rules were still abstract. She assumed they referred to discipline, loyalty, restraint. It would take time for her to understand what obedience truly meant. Menglong learned faster. His invitations began soon after. Private gatherings described as informal celebrations. Opportunities to bond with investors and patrons whose support could secure long-term success. Attendance was never explicitly mandatory, yet absence was noted, commented on, remembered. Yu appeared at these events increasingly tense. Photographs from the period show subtle changes. His posture stiffening, his smile thinning. Song noticed it before anyone else. She recalled the first night she saw him seated beneath the glare of crystal chandeliers, glass after glass placed before him without request. Refusal was met with laughter, encouragement, insistence disguised as generosity. The room was filled with men whose influence extended beyond the entertainment industry. Property developers, financiers, political intermediaries. Their conversations moved easily between business and amusement, between careers and consequences. Compliance was treated as courtesy. At these gatherings, Song began to understand the structure surrounding her. Talent was currency. Silence was collateral. Those who pleased the room advanced. Those who hesitated, stalled. Those who resisted vanished. No threats were spoken openly. None were necessary. The system communicated through example. Menglong struggled under the weight of it. Witnesses later described him as withdrawn during this period. His health declined visibly. He lost weight. His sleep became irregular. He began canceling interviews without explanation. In private, he confided in Song with a frankness he offered no one else. Every promise felt like a trap. Every invitation carried an unspoken cost. He wrote these thoughts down, as if committing them to paper might grant some measure of control. Song listened. She sympathized, but she remained afraid. Fear was the most effective tool the system possessed. It kept questions unasked. It transformed discomfort into routine. It convinced those trapped within it that survival depended on endurance rather than resistance. Song believed that if they endured quietly, the worst would pass. That compliance was temporary. That careers, once secured, could not be so easily threatened. This belief would prove fatal. The more Yu withdrew, the more attention he attracted. Absence was interpreted as defiance, silence as ingratitude. He began to miss gatherings intentionally. He declined invitations without providing excuses. The machinery responded predictably. Pressure increased. Schedules shifted without warning. Roles became uncertain. Meetings were postponed indefinitely. Song felt the tension tightening around both of them. One night, after another private event, Yu leaned against a wall outside the venue, his voice barely audible over the noise of the city. If fame meant this, he said, he did not want it anymore. There was no drama in his tone, only exhaustion, a quiet resolve that frightened her more than anger ever could. Song wanted to believe he was venting, that the system would recalibrate, that reason would prevail. Instead, she began to notice changes in how others interacted with them. Conversations stopped when they approached. Messages went unanswered. Invitations ceased arriving for Yu altogether. Refusal, she would later learn, was the one sin the system never forgave. That night, she understood the rules had never been written for her benefit. The system did not announce itself. It revealed its shape gradually, through repetition rather than revelation. What had once appeared as isolated demands began to form a pattern. Invitations arrived with increasing frequency, each framed as an opportunity that could not be declined. Locations changed. The faces remained the same. Influence gathered in familiar rooms, behind closed doors where careers were negotiated as casually as drinks were poured. Song Yan learned to recognize the choreography. The gatherings followed a predictable rhythm. Private lounges, VIP clubs sealed off from the public, security stationed discreetly at entrances, phones collected or rendered useless by conveniently malfunctioning cameras. Contracts were not discussed openly. They did not need to be. Everyone present understood the transaction. Entertainment in exchange for protection. Silence in exchange for survival. Chen Horn was often at the center of these evenings, a man whose wealth insulated him from scrutiny, whose connections extended upward into political corridors and outward into media offices. He did not issue commands loudly. He summoned. Performers were called to his table as one might summon possessions. Refusal was met with thin smiles and long memories. Song watched as younger stars complied automatically, their fear masked by rehearsed politeness. She watched as alcohol was poured relentlessly, blurring judgment and erasing resistance. What unsettled her most was how normal it all became, how quickly outrage was replaced by routine. Menglong endured these nights in silence. He drank when instructed. He laughed when expected. Yet the toll was visible. Witnesses later described his hands trembling as glasses were placed before him, his gaze drifting toward exits he never used. He looked to Song more than once, eyes searching for reassurance she could not provide. She was trapped by the same invisible walls. Fear rendered her complicit. The machinery extended far beyond these rooms. Schedules were altered without explanation. Rehearsals postponed. Appearances rescheduled to accommodate private events that took priority over professional commitments. Talent managers enforced these changes with precision, framing them as strategic necessities. Directors dangled leading roles like rewards, conditional upon discretion. Media executives erased stories before they reached print, ensuring that rumors dissolved before they could crystallize into allegations. At the highest level, protection was guaranteed. Wu Shilin's name circulated quietly, spoken only in fragments. A senior official whose intervention ensured that complaints stalled, investigations were redirected, and files disappeared into bureaucratic obscurity. He functioned as a shield, insulating the network from consequence. In return, his access to private entertainment remained uninterrupted. The message was clear. The system was untouchable. Menglong began documenting his decline. His journals, later entered into evidence, revealed a mind under siege. Each entry read less like a confession and more like a warning. Every glass they handed him felt poisoned. Every promise concealed a trap. The language grew increasingly bleak. His sense of agency eroded line by line. He described feeling watched even in moments of solitude. Surveillance, whether real or implied, was effective enough to paralyze him. Song was aware of these writings. She read them with a mixture of guilt and dread. She urged caution. She pleaded with him to endure quietly. Just a little longer. She told herself she was protecting him. In truth, she was protecting herself. The pressure intensified when Yu began withdrawing. He missed scheduled gatherings without explanation. He declined invitations that once would have been unavoidable. The response was swift. Roles promised verbally were reassigned. Meetings were canceled indefinitely. Messages went unanswered. His career, once accelerating effortlessly, stalled overnight. Isolation was the system's preferred punishment. Song felt the repercussions immediately. Her own opportunities narrowed. Subtle warnings were delivered through intermediaries. Concerns expressed about her reliability. Suggestions that association with Yu was becoming professionally inconvenient. No direct threats were made. None were necessary. The implication hovered persistently. Distance yourself, or follow him into obscurity. One evening, after another enforced appearance, Yu spoke words that would later be repeated in court. If fame required submission, he wanted no part of it. There was no anger in his voice, only resignation. A recognition that compliance demanded the surrender of something irretrievable. His humanity, his dignity. Song heard finality in his tone. It terrified her. She urged him to reconsider, to wait, to compromise. Resistance, she feared, would invite consequences neither of them could withstand. Yu listened without argument, but his decision had already been made. The system noticed. Refusal disrupted the machinery. It introduced unpredictability into a structure dependent on obedience. Yu Menglong had become a liability. His presence, once profitable, now represented risk. A reminder that compliance was not universal, that silence could fracture. From that moment forward, events accelerated with unsettling clarity. Calls arrived late at night, instructions delivered indirectly, names invoked as reminders of authority. Song found herself positioned as a mediator without consent, asked to reassure, to persuade, to bring Yu back into alignment. She understood the implication immediately. If she failed, responsibility would shift. The machine did not require her loyalty anymore. It required her utility. Refusal, she would learn, was the one sin the system never forgave. The final night did not arrive with violence announced in advance. It arrived disguised as routine. Song Yiren received the call shortly after sunset. The tone was familiar, calm, instructive, a reminder of obligations framed as reassurance. There was a gathering scheduled. Yu Menglong's presence was requested, expected, necessary to smooth misunderstandings that had, according to the voice on the line, escalated unnecessarily. Song hesitated. She asked whether Yu's attendance was truly required. The pause on the other end of the call lasted just long enough to register as a warning. The answer, when it came, was measured. This was an opportunity to correct course, to demonstrate goodwill, to prevent further complications. The implication was unmistakable. Refusal would not end the matter. It would worsen it. She contacted Yu immediately. He listened in silence as she relayed the message. He did not argue. He did not protest. He said only that he was tired, that he wanted it to be over. Song interpreted his resignation as consent. She told herself that this night would be no different from the others. Another endurance, another compromise, another survival. She was wrong. The venue was familiar. A private room reserved under a name that never appeared on official records. Security posted discreetly. The same faces present. The same expectations, unspoken yet absolute. Music played softly, designed to obscure conversation. Glasses were filled before requests were made. From the moment they entered, Song sensed that something had shifted. Yu was seated immediately, drink placed in his hand, instructions delivered without pretense. The atmosphere felt tighter, less performative, the laughter forced, the patience thinner. What had once been framed as indulgence now resembled interrogation. Comments turned sharper. Jokes carried edges. Yu resisted subtly at first. He set his glass aside. He responded with silence instead of compliance. The room noticed. The confrontation escalated quickly. Voices rose. Words sharpened. Accusations surfaced, cloaked in mock concern. Gratitude questioned. Loyalty challenged. Yu stood, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. For a moment, it seemed as if he might leave. He did not make it to the door. Witness accounts would later vary. Some described a struggle. Others recalled shouting. All agreed on one point. The violence, when it came, was sudden, efficient, final. By the time Song reached him, Yu Menglong lay motionless. The room had fallen silent again. Not with shock, with calculation. No one called for help. Phones reappeared. Messages were sent. Instructions distributed. The machinery activated with practiced precision. The men who had raised their voices moments earlier now avoided eye contact. The gathering dissolved quietly, as if nothing irreparable had occurred. Song was left alone with the body. In the hours that followed, reality rearranged itself around her. She was questioned, then accused. Her presence at the scene reframed as participation. Her attempts to explain dismissed as self-preservation. Those who had orchestrated the evening vanished from view, their names absent from reports, their involvement unacknowledged. By morning, the narrative had been established. Yu Menglong was dead. Song Yiren was complicit. The investigation that followed moved with unsettling efficiency. Evidence surfaced selectively. Testimonies aligned conveniently. Timelines adjusted. The system closed ranks. Those with power receded into invisibility, while those without it were presented for judgment. Song's despair curdled into clarity. In confinement, she began to write. Letters, notes, fragments of recollection, assembled with meticulous care. Names repeated until they lost their abstraction. Each page documented a role, a command, a silence purchased or enforced. These writings were confiscated, but the act of recording transformed her understanding of what had occurred. She had not been spared. She had been chosen. The system did not need her loyalty anymore. It needed her silence. Her execution would resolve the inconvenience neatly. A singular villain. A contained tragedy. Closure without consequence. As the trial progressed, prosecutors framed her as a willing participant. The public, grieving and furious, accepted the narrative readily. It was simpler, more satisfying. The idea of a monstrous system was harder to confront than the idea of a single guilty individual. The death sentence was delivered without hesitation. Song Yiren listened without reaction. The shock had passed long before the verdict. What remained was resolve. If she was to die, she would not do so quietly. She would not allow the machinery to complete its cycle unchallenged. Her final opportunity arrived unexpectedly. A procedural formality. A chance to address the court before sentencing was finalized. Few expected her to speak at all. Fewer still anticipated what followed. She rose unsteadily. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. She did not plead. She named. Each name landed with deliberate precision. Each role articulated without embellishment. The judge attempted to intervene. Objections were raised. The words continued, uninterrupted, uncontainable. The room erupted as the illusion of control fractured publicly for the first time. By the time guards approached, it was too late. The system had been exposed not through investigation, but through sacrifice. They did not need her loyalty anymore. They needed her silence. The courtroom never fully recovered from what Song Yiren had done. By the time order was restored, the damage was irreversible. The names she had spoken were already moving beyond the walls of the chamber, carried by journalists, transmitted through unsecured messages, repeated in hurried whispers across offices that had long believed themselves immune to scrutiny. The trial had ceased to be about a single defendant. It had become an indictment of an entire structure. Within hours, the story fractured official boundaries. State media struggled to contain it. Social platforms surged with fragmented lists, partial transcripts, and recordings reconstructed from memory. Vigils appeared overnight. Candles lined streets outside entertainment headquarters. Fans held photographs of Menglong, his face illuminated by phone screens and quiet grief. What had once been admiration transformed into fury. Fury demanded answers. Investigators, pressed by public outrage, reopened files that had been sealed without explanation. Financial records surfaced. Communications long buried were re-examined. Timelines were reconstructed with uncomfortable clarity. None of it could save Song Yiren. Her fate had been sealed before she ever stood to speak. But it ensured that her words would not vanish with her. The response from those she had accused followed a familiar pattern. Denials issued swiftly. Statements drafted carefully. Claims of fabrication attributed to desperation. Some disappeared from public view entirely, retreating behind layers of security and influence. Others remained visible, protected by titles that still commanded obedience. Yet something fundamental had shifted. The illusion of invisibility was broken. Song Yiren's final days were spent in confinement, marked by contradiction. Letters arrived from strangers who called her brave. Others condemned her as unforgivable. She accepted both judgments without protest. In one of her last recorded statements, she acknowledged the weight of her actions without attempting absolution. She did not ask to be remembered as innocent. She asked only that the truth endure. Menglong's legacy evolved in parallel. His work resurfaced across platforms. Old interviews were replayed, his pauses scrutinized, his smiles reinterpreted. Fans spoke of moments they had missed, of sadness they now believed had always been present. He became more than a performer. He became a symbol of what obedience had cost and what resistance had demanded. The system did not collapse, but it cracked. Regulations were announced, committees formed, promises made. Some protections were strengthened, others remained performative. Many of those Song Yiren had named retained their positions, their influence merely redistributed rather than dismantled. Power, after all, was adaptive. Still, silence no longer functioned as it once had. Whispers carried risk. Patterns attracted attention. Every unexplained absence, every sudden death, every sealed contract was measured against what had happened to Menglong and Song Yiren. The precedent lingered. Truth, it turned out, could survive even when the speaker did not. Song Yiren walked to her execution without resistance. Witnesses later described her composure as unsettling. Her final words were not a defense. They were a repetition of Menglong's name, A reminder of why she had spoken at all. Her body was gone by nightfall. Her testimony was not. The files were archived. The case was officially closed. Few believed that ending, because in the space she had torn open, something remained exposed. A warning etched into the consciousness of an industry built on silence. Silence could kill. Truth, however costly, could burn through lies. And once ignited, it was impossible to contain.